Good morning. Welcome to Tech Talk, where we bring experts from various areas at the county that is of interest to our audience to talk about some of the key topics. Budget is on top of everyone's list, whether it is the commissioner's court or the elected members or the executive directors at the department or the general staff here at the county and our residents. So today our guest is the Executive Director over the Office of Management and Budget, Mr. Daniel Ramos. My name is Sindhu Menon. I'm the Executive Director for Universal Services and the Chief Information Officer for the county. It is my pleasure to welcome Daniel today. Daniel, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Sindhu. Thank you for having me.
Daniel, before we get started, can you share something about your office? What does Office of Management and Budget stand for? What is their core values, etc.?
Sure. So the Office of Management and Budget, I like to think of as one of the few offices in the county that has a 10,000-foot view on the intersection of the operations, the financial, the policy, the economics of the county. And really, the way I view my role is very much in providing the information, gathering the information, and presenting it to Commissioner's Court. We just don't have enough money to pay for absolutely everything that we want. And so it's really about prioritizing and trying to make sure that, we're being data-driven, that we're following best practices. And when we invest an extra dollar in a department, we know what we're getting back or not.
Got it. Thank you. You touched on the budget and the process, right, of your department, how you go through the various initiatives that you have. So the months of June, July, the last, quite several months that your team has been working on this massive task of getting the budget approved at the court. So we just got it approved, and what are some of the key topics that you think are the key areas of focus that you think you would like to highlight from the budget for fiscal year 24?
Sure. So our budget increased about $250 million from last year's budget, and about 90 of that is actually salary increases. So something we're very proud of is a 7% COLA for civilians and law enforcement supervisors, and then a 4% for deputies. We know that's not enough. It's a starting place. This is really just to get our employees to where they should have been all along. There are very few jurisdictions that I know of that can COLA their way to competitive salaries. And so this is a first step, not a last step, in trying to get us on par with some of our peer jurisdictions, not just here in the region, but statewide, nationally. And a couple other key investments. We are expanding the number of district courts by 3 and then an additional 3 in fiscal year 25. The single most expensive thing that we do in the county is outsourcing prisoners. We currently spend close to $40 million a year on outsourcing, and that's just unsustainable for a county even as large as ours. And so we're hoping that additional capacity, we're going to see, inroads on the court backlog. We're going to see inroads on the number of prisoners that we have in our jail, and ultimately the number that we're being forced to outsource at the moment. And then a couple other underrated investments that I feel will show long term. We're creating a detective class at the sheriff, so that we work collaboratively with them on making sure we have career paths. I think what we're seeing around the county is yes, people get frustrated about their salary, but I think they also get frustrated because they don't see what the next step is. We're not a civil service jurisdiction. We don't have collective bargaining. And so from year to year, there's a lot of uncertainty on what my salary is going to be. And so we're creating the detective class, and we're hoping that, we're keeping the best and brightest in those roles, and that, those are the folks that really do fight crime, and that we're going to, there's going to be a competition to get those jobs, and folks are going to want to stay in them long term and become better detectives as they mature in their career.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. I know you come from a very extensive public sector background, and you have done this for many years. What have you seen as some of the challenges and or opportunities here at the county while you're working on the budget process?
Sure. So like you mentioned, I spent a decade in Baltimore City. And really there, it was figuring out how to navigate, hundreds of years worth of rules and laws that just didn't meet kind of the modern standard. Here, it's the total opposite. There aren't a lot of rules on the books. And so it's really building. And what we're seeing, one of the things that I've tried to do since I've been here is just create repeatable processes. We did the current level of service forecast, for the first time as part of the 23 budget, which is really an attempt to separate what does the county need to spend money on versus what does the county want to spend money on. When you have those conversations at the same time, it's really easy for the wants to outweigh the needs, and then you're in the middle of the fiscal year and say, hey, why did nobody ask for that? This year we started doing quarterly projections. So at any given time, we can tell Commissioners Court, this is where we are as a county. Here's where your flexibility is. Or, hey, we really think we need to start paring back. This year we did a full budget cycle, which I'm hoping to repeat next year. And there's been a lot of turnover in my office and this role over the last few years. And I think the directors certainly and the fiscal staff have some whiplash around the different processes. I'm hoping that the process is going to look very similar next year. So it's really building those processes. It's also just getting some clarity. There was discussion at the last court about, the unfunded PCNs and some of the changes. And, this is the one jurisdiction that I've worked in and I've worked in for at this point, where the question of is it funded or is it not funded is so hard to answer. And I can't tell you how many times, executive directors, folks with upper level degrees, doctorates, come to me and ask, hey, can I fill this position? Like that's a new one for me. Like if we were in the city of Baltimore, I would say the position's funded, go fill it. Here, there is a little bit of art to it about whether something is funded or not. So we're just trying to bring clarity to those questions of like whether something is funded or not funded, and really allow you, the departments, to make those decisions and go full speed ahead, be aggressive, get to your payroll encumbrance, fill your vacancies because you have them.
Thank you, and I apologize for this.
No worries.
So that's great to hear. Now I'll tag along with that thought process. Here at Universal Services, we are all about innovation and empowering the departments to achieve their end goals and also provide the best services to our residents. So innovation is on the forefront. We are, as you would know, that Universal Services is responsible for information technology, fleet services, constituent services through 311, and the sustainability in the fleet operations. Yes. All of that is a large charge for us, and we are constantly looking at, bringing the efficiency into our internal processes, as well as enabling the innovative ideas to grow and become a proof of concept for our county departments, right? So one of the key things that my team works on is bringing those business cases to your offices so that we can work with both our stakeholder as well as with y'all in ensuring there's a clean budget process, right? And I don't believe that I'm the only one who works on these kind of concepts. I think innovation happens across the county in multiple departments, and ours is more like, for example, we inherited the data team, so we are building a data practice. Generative AI is a common term that's being used across the world. And we're trying to see how we can build better solutions through using those generative AI tools that we have, better secure county operations, taking care of the county assets, technology assets in a more safer, secure manner. So all of that is on the forefront for us. What would you suggest as the best form? How can we be more effective in working with your team and also enabling your team to provide us the support that we as departments need?
Got it. So I think a couple things. One is, you touched on this, the business case. Like when you're able to clearly articulate what the need is, the system is at end of life, being able to quantify what the risk would be, being able to quantify how much it's going to cost. Oftentimes we get, systems out of date. The vendor may or may not be supporting this. We don't know how much it's going to cost. We haven't done the research on what the replacement is. We haven't done the research on what the update is. And so the tighter those things are, the easier it is for me to come look at it and say, yes, we get these requests from everybody, whether it's Commissioners Court, the independently electeds, the administrative departments under the OCA umbrella. And so for me, it's all about prioritizing. So the folks that are able to clearly articulate what the business need is, what the exposure for the county is, what the costs are going to be, what the implementation timeline is going to be, the easier it is for me to prioritize those and say yes to them. It's also about, you know, and I think you've seen this, and I see it every day, is oftentimes, you know, the county is in, and I'm stealing this from one of the Gartner consultants, is at a different state of maturity than a lot of other counties, right? Because of how decentralized it's been. You know, this county was incredibly rich for a very long time, and so I still think people like expect me to go back into my office and come out with a check and say, here, solve your problem with money. Is, you know, are we leapfrogging past, you know, getting the basics right? So, you know, we hear a lot, it's like, well, best practices over here and we're over here and we want to get here in one go. Is that practical? Are we going to be able to implement it? So oftentimes I'll push back and say, hey, like, let's do the little things right first. And is there a low cost or no cost solution to just get us to a baseline where we can be able to see very clearly, you know, what the issue is?
Got it. Thank you for that. And we'll continue to work on building better business cases that could be, you know, easier for your staff to support with. So,
and I think one last thing just to add on to that is, you know, the tighter the department budgets are, so like where it's very clear through the programs and services, through the line item budgets, the clearer it is, you know, what we're currently spending money on, and the ability for a department to spend money, the easier it is for me to say yes. And so there are oftentimes departments will come, especially departments with lots of turnover, where they have big surpluses year over year. It's difficult for me to have to go to commissioner's court and say, hey, you know, this department needs more money, but they still have $4 or $5 million in surplus. So the tighter that those things are, and the more that the department can show that they're spending their money year to year, the easier it is for me to go to commissioner's court, because ultimately that's what I have to do. Like when there's new spending items, I have to go and I have to request it for commissioner's court, and if I can't articulate it, then they're not going to agree to it.
got it. Thank you. Now, there is one key question that I get asked, so I'm going to pose it to you because it directly relates to some of the direction that we received from your office, right? So in budgeting. So I know that this budget cycle, there was COLA in the budget, and I know that all of us are very thankful for that approval from the Commissioner's Court to move forward with that, and a recommendation from the Commissioner's Court. And the time that your staff put into building that COLA into our budgets, we're very thankful for that. Now, going forward, what's the plan next in terms of, you know, how do we, you know, we have a challenge, as you know, various departments, not just my department. We are on the forefront as a technology folks. We constantly have to compete with the private sector to ensure that we are providing the best work environment and the remuneration that should go with the positions. So help me understand, how are you building the employee either pay per performance and or COLA plans in the future?
Sure. So our workforce, you know, is what keeps me up at night. That is the thing I think we're really far behind in terms of being competitive, you know, not just in our region, but the state or even nationally now that, you know, many jobs are remote and we're competing with everybody everywhere at any given time. Like I mentioned, the COLA was a first step, not a last step. You know, this was really not meant for us to get parity with City of Houston or, you know, with Galveston County or whoever we're competing with. It was really meant to just get employees to square one, where they should have been all along. And some of the things that we're doing to try to build in that to get to that level of parity is we're doing a classification study now. We're hoping to get that bid shortly and get it awarded. What we have found in prior studies is that we have, you know, same qualification, same years of service, same classification, making very different salaries in different departments. And that's just a function of how decentralized the county has been for many years. And so that's wrong, and we have to fix that first. We also have a lot of internal competition, you know, between different departments for similar type classifications. And you know, we all encourage folks to, you know, if there's an engineer who wants to become an engineering supervisor in HECTRA or flood control, that's great, but we shouldn't be losing folks for lateral moves across the county. And so that classification study, I'm hoping, brings brings us to square one, brings us to where there's some normalization around what the job duties are, what the qualifications are, and a requisite salary. I don't know if we're going to be able to fit it all in 1 year, but I'm hoping over the next few years we're able to phase it in, and that's how we get to competitive salaries and we get to equitable pay for gender and race, all things the county hasn't looked at before. And really, the COLA is meant to keep up with inflation, and the COLA is not meant. And so that's really my focus over the next couple of years is let's get a North Star. Let's figure out how far behind we really are. And let's figure out what the right number is, whether, just using deputies as an example, we have some of our deputies at different years of service are about 14% their counterparts at HPD. Like, what is the right number? Is it 90, 95% when you normalize with our benefits, et cetera? And so figuring out what those benchmarks are, is specific to technology and technology classifications, we need those salaries just move a lot faster than lots of other positions. Mm-hmm. And so once we get the classification study done, we have to build in a process to be able to look at them. Many jurisdictions look at about a third of their classifications a year. And so every 3 years, they're refreshing the salary scales to be competitive in the market. 3 years is a long time in IT, but still it's better than what we're doing now, which is kind of this hodgepodge. One department has a little extra money, has some vacancies, willing to give them up to give salary increases, which causes competition. And so we're playing this game of musical chairs with our staff without really growing the team ultimately, which is what we want. And we want to have a fully staffed department to be able to deliver services.
Sure. Well, thank you for your time. Daniel, before we will have questions pretty soon from our audience. But before we start the question round with audience, any last thing that you would like to share with our audience? Anything that I haven't covered or anything that you would like to bring up here?
Sure. No, I just want to thank everybody. I'm a little short of 2 years now. I feel like I've learned a lot, and Harris County has been very welcoming. I know I don't often come with the best news for departments or for staff, and oftentimes I feel like I have to be Dr. No just because the role that I'm in. But I'm very proud of the work that we've done. I'm very proud of the budget and the process we went through, and just look forward to keep building on it.
Got it. Thank you, Daniel. So with that, the forum is open for questions. There is a question from the audience here where they're asking, shouldn't the question of PCN be handled by HRRM?
Sure, and that's a fair question. And what I will say is about 80% of the county's total budget is people. And so because of that, I have to have a role. Like, I have to understand what's happening in terms of classification, compensation, the number of PCNs. So there's an interplay there. And I work very closely with Director Carousel on all of these things, whether they're policy, whether they're financial, whether they're benefits, just because we have to be, hand in glove and march to the same beat to be able to make sure that we're being fiscally responsible, that our processes and policies don't violate federal or local laws when it comes to HR. So yes, many of those questions can be fielded by either of us, but I do feel there's a very strong partnership between our departments.
Thank you, Daniel. You addressed COLA in our conversation earlier. So there's another question, a follow-up on that. Can we expect COLA increases annually?
That would be the goal, that there is something built in annually. I think over the next couple of years, it'll depend what the salary study comes back as. If the salary study comes back and saying it's 120 million, we're obviously not going to be able to afford that in the first year. So figuring out where do we prioritize? Once we get to that level, that baseline level, yes, there should be, and it'll vary depending on our budget situation. It'll vary depending on what inflation is in the market. But again, they're not necessarily meant to get us to parity. They're really meant to just keep up with inflation and maintain the buying power of our employees.
Thank you, Daniel. Now, as we wait for other questions to be coming up on the screen, I have one question for you. In the next 3 to 5 years, or next year and the following years, as you're doing your strategic planning for those number of years, what should the departments, the residents, and or the staff be looking out for in the budgets? You know, if you have any plans or anything that you foresee in the next 3 to 5 years.
Sure. And just to get back to the last question, you know, like I mentioned, I think one of the harder things about work, and I've said this in court, so I don't think it's a secret. One of the harder things about working for Harris County is that uncertainty. You know, City of Houston has contracts with its unions. Many other jurisdictions have a similar agreement where our staff really doesn't know what they're going to make next year, right? And it's really at the decision of court, and and that's why I believe in prior years there just weren't COLAs given, because it just kind of fell by the wayside compared to other priorities. And so what I would like to do is when we get to this to a certain level of baseline, when the classifications are done, is actually plan it out, you know, get to a goal. You know, in 3 years, we want to do 12%, you know, in 2 years, we want to get to 7%, and then give ourselves the flexibility, depending on what the fiscal situation is, to adjust, but be able to give some certainty to our employees about what they're going to be making in future years.
Got it. Thank you.
And then in terms of, you know, we are very close to awarding our 5-year financial plan, which I'm very excited about. It's something I worked on in the city of Baltimore, and I think it's just the best practice for jurisdictions to have some North Stars, you know, have initiatives. And then, you know, one thing I want to highlight is, you know, we've talked a lot about the budget and how there's not enough money. This is happening under kind of ideal financial situation. So last year, assessments grew 12%. We had almost 3% of new construction, which is much higher than a typical year. Our pension was flat. Our pension contributions were flat. Healthcare was relatively flat in comparison to prior years. So like we're feeling the fiscal pressure, and we're in ideal circumstances, right? And so at some point, the ideal circumstances go away. And so I want to be proactive and develop that 5-year plan and have options and levers that we can pull and present to Commissioner's Court and say, you know, what happens if we go into a recession, or what happens if there's no new construction next year, or how do we get us to a place where we can bridge ourselves through the dark time, because we know, you know, especially here in Houston's very resilient. It's going to come back. People want to live here. It's going to continue to grow as long as something drastic doesn't change. And so that's what we're trying to do. You know, one thing that I'm, you know, again, going back to just the basics, is just how much do we spend compared to our peers on different things? I think this is a question that you get asked all the time, and it's hard for you to answer because of how decentralized the county is, but how much do we spend on IT versus other peer organizations? I don't know if you can answer that question. I certainly cannot. You know, when you look at our law enforcement, I think we spend probably right around what we should, or compared to other jurisdictions, but it's broken up across 9 law enforcement departments. So trying to figure out, like, what is that baseline? What are we working with, and where are we behind in terms of spending, and where do we need to invest to get us up to what national standards are?
Thank you, Daniel. I think we have a few more questions and about 6 minutes with us. So for quickly going to the first question that has come up is, what is the number one item to fund after employees?
I think our facilities. You know, we go into, and you know, credit to Dr. Ramon and his property team for being so proactive of us procuring new buildings, having a plan to renovate a lot of this downtown campus. But, you know, the thing that I get concerned with is, you know, where our employees spend 8 to 12 hours a day in their building, right? And I know we focus on compensation a lot, but you know, our fleet, our buildings are probably the next thing that people look at. And if you're in a nice building, if you have natural light, if you have a car that works, those things are, you know, important to your morale and whether you want to keep working here or not, when there are other jurisdictions that are building brand new. And so that's one thing that I have a focus on. You know, I've worked with Dr. Ramon very closely of figuring out ways, how do we upgrade our facilities and bring them up to a standard that we're proud of, that we're proud to have our employees in, and our employees are proud to show up to work and work in a facility that matches the dedication that they're putting in on a day-to-day basis.
Thank you, Daniel. I think the other question, I'll have to pick and choose because we may not have time to address all the questions. So what is your plan for more financial transparency for Harris County?
Sure. So I think our this year's budget book was a step towards that. We tried as much as we can to tell a story. This is our jurisdiction. This is how that the demographics and the economics of our jurisdiction translate into a budget, and being able to articulate, this portion of the budget goes to justice and safety, and here are the performance measures and KPIs that we hold ourselves accountable to. So we know if we're investing 3 new courts, are we seeing on the back end the results that we want? This year we published volume 2, or the department detail, which is the first time the county's ever done that, which kind of showed a change state, very clearly. Your department started at X, your department ended at Y, and here's how it cross-referenced. This is the pension, this was the COLA increases, here are all the decisions Commissioners Court made to get you to that final number. This is the first year that we did community engagement, where we went to community meetings and had the residents, actually build their own budget, and so, we're working slowly towards, more transparency. We're working with the departments to get to the level of granularity where they can make decisions, where Commissioners Court can make decisions, where I can make decisions, kind of, being on the same page.
Got it. Thank you. And then I will take one final question before we close out. So the question is, what is the timeline for salary study, and when should we expect individual merit increases?
So I believe we should be getting it awarded. My hope would be before the new year. I do think that it's such a large bill that the county is going to have to face that is likely something we're going to have to take up as part of the budget process. We are prioritizing employees that are making under $50,000. So some of them might be sooner than later, but it's going to be hard to kind of make decisions on the whole thing or on pieces of it until you kind of know what the price tag is for the full thing. And then we need to figure out how are we going to phase it in, if we're going to phase it in, or just rip off the Band-Aid and say, let's get to square one. That's Commissioner's Court decision, but we'll just need to see, what that final price tag is. My expectation is there might be some that get implemented in maybe the final quarter, fiscal year 24, but likely the majority of it would be implemented for fiscal year 25.
Sounds good. So I have one question that I think I will go ahead and ask because it's close to my heart as well. Do we expect artificial intelligence to increase or decrease workforce staff from budget perspective?
So that's an interesting question. What I would say is, I don't know if the workforce, the number would change and go down. I think it might get reallocated.
Exactly.
I don't think there's any department or member of or county staff that feels like their department or their unit or bureau is fully staffed. And so we are looking for those efficiencies. We're not necessarily looking for those efficiencies just to cut. That, we would be looking for those efficiencies to be able to invest in what our priorities are. And so while I think that there are some things where, artificial intelligence could replace, and we've seen them replace, the being able to do your password, via chat or via text or via an automated phone line as opposed to talking to a real person. Other jurisdictions have made that change. That doesn't necessarily mean that we want that person to stop working for the county. We want that person to maybe be in cybersecurity and helping shore up our cybersecurity. So it just really depends. I don't necessarily feel we're going to see the county's growing. And for many years, the county's staff did not, and correspondingly. And so we have some ground to make up in that arena.
Yeah, and I would like to add that, this is one of the top questions that get asked to anyone who's talking about artificial intelligence. And we have the guidance that our team has worked with all the offices across the county. That would be on the Commissioner's Court as one of the agenda items is the generative AI and the use of generative AI for the county. So we just have 5 seconds before we close out. I'd like to ask, what is a tech gadget that you cannot do without?
My Outlook calendar. So Rita, who is my administrative assistant, Thank you so much for managing it. She actually controls my life. I just go wherever she tells me. But if I didn't have my calendar, I'd be lost.
Thank you, Daniel. We appreciate your time today. And thank you to the audience for the questions.